Hi everyone, this is Chaudhary, psychotherapist, and today I'm here with Fern Schumer Chapman, author, and we're going to be talking about sibling estrangement and the holidays. Now, the holidays can be a challenging time for many of us and in our sibling estrangement community. And it can be a time where old wounds can resurface, for example. Like it can be time that brings us to question how we should act and what we should do. In today's episode, we'll try to continue to empower ourselves in these difficult times, especially now that the holidays are approaching. So it's wonderful to have you here, Fern. Thanks so much for being here.
The dreaded holidays. The holidays bring estrangement into sharp relief. Those gatherings serve as a kind of roll call for who's in and who's out of the family. And it can be devastating for those who are excluded. But it's also important to put things in some perspective. And I'm hoping this episode will help do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so important for us to be talking about this, right? Because so many people in our community go through this, right? And they dread the holidays. They dread them for everything that it brings up, right? And there's so many things that can happen to us where all of the old stuff starts to kind of resurface because we're reminded of what we don't have, right?
Or what we wish we had. There's the fantasy of what it should be because we are exposed constantly to these very magical Christmas experiences, and most people don't have it.
Exactly, right? It brings up a lot of disappointment and pain for us, right? And I think that's the thing that happens oftentimes that people are faced with, right? It's having to navigate through that, right? Because all of society seems to be putting the onus on the holidays, festive cheer, festive joy, all of that, right? Except
And will
for us.
you be with your family?
Yeah, yeah, exactly, right? And the family element seems to be very present, especially in moments like this, and I think we're staunchly reminded of what it is that we don't have. And case in point, I went and dropped a present for my nephew there just recently, and I was told to just drop it on the porch, and that was it. There's no invitation. There's no idea of come on in. We'd love to have you here. In fact, my sister wasn't there. And that's how it was done. It was all done through text message.
Yeah, it feels like an obligation, something to just check off your list. And her reactions was pretty dismissive.
Yeah, yeah. So that's kind of how I felt too, is that you're going to go see other family members, or friends, but you're not going to take some time to be able to see me, so I can give your child a present and such. So all these building blocks for sibling estrangement are still occurring right in front of me.
Well, and I think there's another really unfortunate part to this, and that is if you're excluded from some of these holiday events, you lose the opportunity to develop connection and relationships with the youngest members of the family. And so that's a big loss because there are only so many of those opportunities, and you feel very frozen out if you don't have that moment.
We were talking about this just before the video, you and I, right? How there's like these building blocks to estrangement that are starting to happen now, right into the next generation because of that, right?
Right. I mean, there are specific developmental windows when you can create a relationship with a child. And once those moments are past, it's really hard to go back. In fact, I would argue you can't.
Well, yeah, that's the thing, isn't it, though? You can't really reclaim those memories or that opportunity that's lost now. So what are you basing that on? And that's the thing, you're basing it on nothing because there is no memory. So it's very philosophical, this whole question of what estrangement does to us. And it's quite something when you're wrestling with this, especially during this time of year.
Yeah, I think there's a tremendous sense of grief, not just for the rejection and the exclusion that you're enduring, but also the loss of identity, such as being an aunt or exposing your kids to cousins. So that's what's producing this terrible sense of loss.
Absolutely. It's how we're somehow prevented from doing that and such. So I think this is a great conversation, and I think this is good because, some people, will choose perhaps not to go to certain family events, but some of us will, right? And I think that it's good to explore in some ways, if you choose to go, what do you do, right?
Right. Not everybody gets an invitation, but if you do get an invitation and you're feeling very, a lot of trepidation about going because it's so stressful, how do you handle it?
Well, that's the thing. And I'm glad we're talking about the invitation, right? Because some people sometimes don't even want the invitation, right? They get an invitation and it's like, well, how do I respond to that? And one of the things I say oftentimes is to people is be diplomatic with it. There's no need to rehash everything that's happened before, right? And another thing also is to kind of keep in mind that how did it end previously, right? Did it end in a volatile way that you may not want to necessarily show the other person that you're okay all of a sudden with what's happened, right?
Right, giving it a stamp of approval. On the other hand, it is an opportunity to be a part of the family and develop other relationships there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's always a good way to look at this is to see what's within you. What is your inclination naturally? Do you tend to want to express yourself? Do you tend to want to be the type of person that responds, and expresses that potential? We've often talked about this, you and I, right? This idea of expressing that potential that's within you. That should be a determining factor whether people go or not, right?
Right. And we've also talked about toxic positivity. And this is the time of year when toxic positivity is on steroids. People want to maintain a false narrative of what the family is, and they expect everyone to buy into it. And that often means that you have to deny your own reality to be a part of it. And I'm not sure everybody wants to go along with that. It's
No,
again, it's you have to sort of balance how much of yourself do you need to forfeit in order to feel a sense of belonging.
exactly, right? I think that that's really, really important. You need to be true to yourself, and this is one of the things that oftentimes we mention to people if they choose to go to a family function like this, right? Is, in some ways, how do you maintain a level of security for yourself that has to do with maintaining emotional security, physical security, social security? All of that combined is very, very important, because people talk about being ganged up on, especially during family events and things of that nature, right?
Well, part of it is, I think, anticipating what's going to happen. If you're going to go, do you expect you're going to hear your uncle talk about politics you don't agree with? Can you prepare and anticipate what he's going to say and how you're going to handle it? Can you find your escape hatch to get out?
It's very important to have an escape strategy, or an exit strategy, as we like to call it, to kind of rehearse how it's going to go if you're going to be going into that, and, even an escape or exit strategy can also be the idea of just excusing yourself to go to the washroom, just going somewhere else where if there's a buildup that's happening, or there's tensions rising within the family, that you've got somewhere else you can go where you can kind of cool off in some ways, recompose yourself, let yourself detach from that. That's really, really important to be able to do that.
Right. And you hope that there's a strong matriarch at the holiday table who basically says, we're not going to talk about politics here. We can't have that kind of division in the family. But
Contentious, yeah, you're absolutely right. Contentious subjects come up all the time, right, Fern? And
right.
I think that that's the thing that's important. People really need to, look at how they can potentially, choose to maintain peace and such, And I think that at the same time, the less we say about certain things, the more, we can maintain peace. It can feel as though we're censoring ourselves, but really we're not. We're simply choosing not to indulge or engage in a subject matter where, we're trying to see who's going to come out on top, right? And yeah,
I was going to say too that setting boundaries, and if you're not comfortable with the topic, it's okay to say, let's talk about that another time. I think this is not a great time for that.
deflections are very good, like you say. I absolutely agree. And one of the things that I suggest also is talk about stuff that the other person's interested in. If they bought a new car or something, or they changed jobs or something. Talk about their level of interests, that can be potentially something that branches out, because oftentimes people will respond favorably when you talk about their interests, right?
Right. And the other piece of that is superficial intimacies. So what do I mean by that? Basically staying in a very safe zone of conversation. And we've talked about this before, whether it's sports or the weather or trips you're taking, that kind of topic fills the air and doesn't get into some of the difficulties that you may be having with that person.
Exactly, exactly. So I think that that's something that you can go into as a rehearsal in your own mind to come up with a list of things perhaps that you could discuss, or general topics that you think would be safe topics, So that way you're exercising control in some areas that you have influence over. And that's very, very important, And I think another part of our community that tends to deal with is the idea of, of course, perhaps if you choose not to go or you can't, how do you cope with this particular feeling of somehow not feeling as though you're wanted, right?
Right. And the key word is anticipating and planning. You know that this is not going to be an easy day. So make plans, make sure you have other ways to occupy yourself so you don't ruminate and think about all you've lost or this sense of abandonment that you might have.
Yeah, absolutely. Making plans is so, so important for you and I have been talking about this, about the idea of filling that space with something, I always like to say, the holidays can be your day as well, So, so, so important for people to, of course, find their time to be able to fill that with loving activities or people that actually want you in their lives.
Right. And actually, service is a great way to address this because when you make somebody else's day a little sweeter, it actually has a big effect on you.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Sometimes volunteer work, or focusing on someone else, it gets you outside of yourself, right? Because the times where we ruminate the most are the ones where we're sitting quietly, and then that's when the mind can start to go. The hamster wheel starts to roll, So we really want to be sure that we can work on that. And we're gonna devote a special episode next time on the subject of rumination because we talked about it before, but I think it's good for our viewers to have a bit of a refresher when it comes to that. So
Yeah.
we'll talk more.
Also, I think that it's dangerous to fantasize, and I always come back to this because estrangement is such a racket in terms of fantasy and what you wish you had, what you thought it could have been. And, it's important to reflect on what those holidays were really like and how you hated your mother's mashed potatoes.
You know,
Or, I use that symbolically, but the point being that you might not miss it quite so much if you remember exactly what had happened at those occasions.
I absolutely agree. I think it's important that people remind themselves of why things are the way they are, right? And it's so, so important to be able to look at that, and a good way to do that is also to ask yourself, like, why is my bio family not functioning? That's actually a question one of our viewers had in the community was that particular aspect, and I think that journaling is good to do when it comes to that, what does it say about you when your biological family isn't functioning, what does it say about them?
Mhm.
What does it say about how you want to live your life? And that last question is really important, right?
Right. And I think a piece of that can also be, what are you grateful for?
Yep.
Because once you start to see what you actually have versus what you don't have,
Yep.
life looks a little different.
Doing the inventory of what our siblings have been unable to do is important. That's part of the work as well to be able to look at that, but also to focus on gratitude, focus on what you have, is going in the other direction than focusing on what you don't have. So once you start to look at your gratitudes, it's what it does. It's what it does emotionally to you that makes the difference. It's great that you're able to fill in that list, but also pay attention to the feeling that comes up when you're experiencing gratitude. That's especially important because that can help to at least foster positive feelings that can outweigh rumination when it builds over time.
I think it's important to recognize that we assign meaning to these experiences.
Mhm.
So if you realize you have that power, you can assign positive or negative meaning.
Absolutely. And it's good also to have different rituals during this time as well. We talk about spending time with others, but it could also be in some instances letting go of certain items, especially in your environment. Are there certain items in your environment that cause you to tend to think about certain things a little bit more about your sibling, especially? Sometimes just putting those items away can be helpful because that's part of grief. That's part of the experience of grief to be able to, of course, help to experience movement with that. And sometimes some people have even said they've thrown out certain things that was given to them by their siblings. So that's a personal choice, but it's to do really what's in your benefit that will be helpful for you when it comes to your own rituals and what you want.
Right. And that actually feeds nicely into what I wanted to say, which is decorating your home just as you like it, making dinners or entertainment the way you want it, preparing special dishes, make it yours.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's really, really important. And if people understand this particular idea that you can reclaim the holidays, if you can reclaim the holidays for yourself, then ultimately you're not a victim. You're not at the mercy or at the subject of other people around you. You're able to make it yours, create the day you want to have, despite everything. And as Viktor Frankl said, you make the best of it. So that's really, really important to be able to do that, you know. So Fern, I'm just looking at the time. We're going to have to wrap it up for today. This is always interesting for us to be able to empower our community like this. It's so, so important to do this. And you and I, of course, we do have some resources that we like to offer
Right.
to our community. So what would be your number one resource at this time that you'd like to give people?
So if you're going to decide to journal during the holidays, I have written a workbook which gives you a guided therapeutic experience, essentially, which is you can write your way through your grief. And it's called the Sibling Estrangement Journal. And I think that would be extremely valuable if you are going to set aside an hour to focus on some of the grief you feel.
There's so little resources out there that when I hear about this, especially I really get amped up because I like it. I like the idea of the sibling estrangement journal because it's a very empowering tool. I'm very happy to see that it's out there, especially. I do recommend it to our viewers. And my number one resource is, of course, the sibling estrangement support group on Zoom that I offer. Of course, I think it's really important for people to come together to break isolation, to be able to have other people that understand them, especially during this time of year. This is especially a difficult time of year for some people. And if people need to reach out, they can of course reach out to me as well too. I do offer private practice, and people can contact me as a psychotherapist to have some sessions with me, of course, if this is an issue you'd like to, of course, work on. So Fern, I'm very, very happy that we're able to do this special episode on the holidays. It's been a while since we've talked about this because we
Yeah.
did do another one, but this one is going deeper still into this subject, and I think this is what has value for our viewers to go even deeper into the realities of what they experience. So thank
Right.
you so much. Thanks
Oh,
again for doing this.
it's really always a pleasure. And I always think back of the years when I was estranged and how nobody talked about it. And there were no resources. And those holidays just cut deep. And so I'm glad we're able to hopefully, patch that up a little bit.
Absolutely, and I'm certain that our viewers will walk away with more, especially with this today. So thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. Great to be here.
All right, I'll talk to you soon, Fern. Take care.
Bye.
Bye bye.